YouTube and Facebook. Larry Forletta from Forletta Investigates. How are you, Larry? And I want to learn more. We've learned a lot about you in the last couple episodes about podcasts, about different things, but I thought we have a great topic for us today to talk about, because I think this is an important one, because we have misconceptions. We just don't really understand why hire someone like this. And I'll tell you about the topic, but I want to say hi to you first. How are you?
Hey, Neil, it's good to be with you as always, and thanks for having me on your show.
And shout out to the Facebook people that are trying to guess who I interviewed a couple days ago, and I finally had to give it up, and that was Abby Lee Miller of Dance Moms. But we have another famous Pittsburgher in Larry Forletta. So let's kind of jump right into specifically enough. Why should we hire a private investigator? Because we know, we talked about this at times. We think of private investigators as people that kind of are shady, the preconceived notions that they kind of didn't want to be in law enforcement, but you don't fit that bill at all. You're the guy that did your time. You did amazing work as a DEA, as a law enforcement agent, and then you took on your career in private investigation. But really, people just look at what they see in the movies.
Yes, and unfortunately, there's always a big misconception about private investigators, as seen on TV. But there is private investigators. I would say the majority of us are professionals that want to do the right thing, give the client the satisfaction and the help that they truly need in their case, whatever it is, whether it's a criminal matter, civil matter, personal matters. The one thing that people don't know is that there's probably over 50,000 private investigators here in the United States. And private investigators are civilians. They're not law enforcement, so they have no authority, but they're licensed. And each state has different licensing requirements. And so, and the other thing that a lot of professional investigators do is they join associations, and they become members of those associations because there's continuing education involved in those associations. For example, I belong to one called PALI. It's the Pennsylvania Association of Licensed Investigators. Another one in Ohio, and then another one that's an international organization, which actually started here in Pennsylvania, is called Intellinet. So, and there's probably 300 or 400 private investigators throughout the United States and internationally. So it's a great network with a lot of professionals, and that helps you do your job much better.
That's great that you're certified, that you have your license. That's an important thing that people don't understand, that I can't just become a private investigator. I can investigate things. I'm an investigating journalist. Why can't I be a private investigator, Larry? Why can't I just do your job? Tell me why.
Well, first of all, in Pennsylvania, for example, you have to have, a prerequisite number of investigative hours to become licensed. So usually, if you're a seasoned law enforcement and you've conducted investigations somewhere in the nature of a couple thousand hours, that qualifies you as a start to become a private investigator. And you meet all the other expectations. You have to be licensed, bonded, and actually you are appointed through the court in that particular location. So if it's in Allegheny County or Lawrence County or wherever, the court actually has to sign off. You have to have, basically people, behind you and things of that nature, so that they're getting the right person. But yeah, you are licensed in that particular county, usually approved, because you have to petition the court. You usually you hire a lawyer, which I did. They petition the court, and then you have references that you have to use, and then once they approve it, then you begin to move on. And plus, if you have a company, your company has to be registered as a state in the state that you're licensed as. So, like I have an LLC, so we're licensed and registered in the state of Pennsylvania.
Wow. Okay. So why hire? You talked about the misconceptions, but then let's talk about why hire a private investigator.
Well, each situation is different, but I'll try to narrow it down to some reasons why you should. And we'll talk specifically about what type of cases that I'm referring to. So let's start with the criminal defense side, that a lot of criminal defense lawyers will hire private investigators. I mean, generally speaking, they look at the background of the private investigator, see what their qualifications are. Usually it's a word of mouth, referrals. And generally they want you to be able to either enhance or help mitigate their case. So if it's a criminal defense case, you're going to go out and interview witnesses and bring that information back to the lawyer. And sometimes that helps them make a decision as to whether they're going to go to trial or they're going to take a plea. And it all depends on the case and the circumstances. So that's one part of it. And plus the fact on the legal side, criminal defense side, lawyers can't go out and be their own witnesses. So that's why they hire private investigators.
So that process begins right when a court case opens up?
Yes, and a lot of times because the attorneys know that there's going to be, they may have a number of witnesses that they may want interviewed. Just like anything else, sometimes they procrastinate and then they wait to make a decision, or they got to, discuss it with their client, whether to bring us in or not. So sometimes, we're playing catch up to, learning more and gathering more information about the facts of the case.
Interesting. I would not have thought that process. So let's just say that you committed like not a murder, but some sort of crime that is going to go to court, and then they could be in deep trouble. It could be something, and there are witnesses to, I guess, to testify against that person. You're going to go ahead and investigate those witnesses to see if they would be worthwhile for the attorney to utilize and cross-examine, or not ask questions, because if they are not a good, reliable witness, then you take them off. You take them off the list of witnesses.
Sure. Well, we'll call. I have been involved in homicide cases, but let's talk about a sexual assault type case, where let's say it's a college atmosphere, which I've had those cases, and there was a bunch of students around, and one particular individual makes an allegations against another. What were they doing? They were drinking or doing whatever. And the next thing you know, you're out gathering the facts from the other individuals that were at that particular party. What was the person like? Were they intoxicated, et cetera, because now it comes down, it's a credibility issue in a lot of these, as they call them, he, she said type cases.
Right. Exactly.
It becomes a credibility issue. So you want to make sure that the witnesses that you either interview or you develop during the course of the investigation are credible. So you have to have a lot of training and experience to be able to do that. And that came from my, 30 years in law enforcement and interviewing thousands of people to just, to try to see whether they are a credible witness that's going to have to testify in a court case. And so it's a process of elimination. And then usually I'll meet with the lawyer and I'll say, okay, I interviewed A, B, C, and D. Here's what I think. Or sometimes we'll bring them into the lawyer's office and we'll both proceed to interview them. And then we discuss it. What do you think? Do you think this person's, credible, and et cetera? And, so we check out the witnesses as thorough as we can, and then we sort through everything else. But that's kind of how that process works, especially in those types of cases.
So before the first time where they interview them, the lawyers don't want to waste their time if they know to even interview them to prep them. They don't even want to waste their time if they're not a credible witness. So that's why they have you come in and dig deep to find out.
Exactly. And that's one of the main reasons behind it. And then the other thing is the reason why we interview them, because say, for example, I was interviewing you and you told me something different at the time of the interview. So I would be called in as a rebuttal witness against you and to what you actually said to me during the course of an interview. That's why the lawyers want private investigators to go out, do those interviews, because in reality, that private investigator is that lawyer's witness, should it become necessary in that case.
So tell me about other reasons to hire a private investigator. That's a great reason, especially if you're a lawyer and you want to get to win the case. Yeah.
Well, and that's always the case, but when you look at a lot of these cases, whether criminal, civil, you have to try to jump ahead of the ball game, so to speak, to try to minimize court exposure. Because back to the criminal side, our criminal justice system would be clogged if we didn't do plea agreements and things of that nature. It would just shut it down. So a lot of times what lawyers are looking for is to mitigate the information that their client gave to them, and plus the facts that we're able to come up with. It's the same way in a civil case, whether it's a personal injury case or anything like that, we do the same thing. So we try to gather all the facts. And it's important, what I always try to stress to the lawyers, whether it's on the criminal side or the civil side, is to get in touch with us ASAP. Don't wait, 2 weeks or 3 weeks down the road and say, oh, I think I need a private investigator. Okay. Because we want to be there from the beginning of the case with a complete understanding of it. And the reason why I say that is because that's what I did for a living. As a DEA agent, when we initiated investigations, myself and the prosecutor worked together from the time that we opened the investigation to the time that we went to federal grand juries, to the time whether we went to trials, or to the time there were plea agreements. So it's like a team concept that everybody knows what each other is doing and what our set of responsibilities are. So the same thing, again, that to me is the way I've applied all my cases, using that theory and how I learned that over time, of trying to get that information, jump on it and move on it as soon as you can. Because the problem with witnesses is memory. And sometimes their memories will fade. The longer you go waiting and waiting and waiting about a situation, now you got to try to rehash the information that they already have.
All right, great. The other things we talked about before, background checks, we talked about that we've already had on the show. We talked about looking at specific employment stuff, and we also talked about spousal abuse, not spousal abuse, divorce proceedings, investigating people that are trying to get out of paying alimony.
Right.
So what other things? Why hire a private investigator?
Well, the other thing that we talked about was child custody.
Yeah.
Those cases are always important because you want to get on top of that right away, because there may be a situation where one parent is doing something illegally or bad behavior, because a lot of times, again, they wait and call us, and then sometimes those things start changing rapidly. So it's best, if you're going to hire a private investigator, don't wait to do it. Pick up the phone and call somebody. And so what we do is, when we get these calls from people, we immediately respond. We'll call them back if we're not answering the phone for whatever reason, and we'll discuss their case right off the bat and see if it's a fit and see if we can actually help them. That's kind of the way we look at it.
Any other things we would think about when hiring a private investigator that we might have missed in the last couple episodes we've covered?
Well, you want to make sure, again, as a lay person or somebody looking to hire a private investigator, look at their qualifications. Always make sure that they're licensed and insured, bonded, et cetera, because that's important for you to make decisions. Because, people call me and say, well, I've never worked with a private investigator. I really don't know, how this works. And the other thing that they don't understand is that you got to pay the private investigator. I tell people, be prepared to have a budget for your case. Don't think that you're just going to pick up the phone and it's going to be done for free, because that's not reality. private investigators have a business to run, and they have issues just like everybody else. So I always tell people, make sure you have a budget in place that you think that you might need, because prices for private investigators, they can run from 75 an hour to 250 an hour. It just depends on the firm, the case, everything. So I always, try to tell them so that they have a clear understanding. Now, so what we do is we have agreements that we sign and have the client sign to make sure they completely understand the services that they're getting. And we explained it to them with this agreement. And then we have agreements, also with our lawyer clients as well.
Okay. All right. So very, very interesting stuff. And I think that you just also look at different things involving protecting people. Do you provide those types of services as well, where if you're looking at issues where, tips involving security, look at active shooter types of things, certain crises that occur in certain buildings, things like that.
One of the things that we do is that, for example, employee terminations, we'll work with that company for them to terminate an employee, whether we do surveillances on them, go with them when they talk to the employee. We've done a few of those. And a lot of times on employee terminations, we coordinate that with law enforcement in that area to make sure that they understand there's an employee being terminated. We don't know if there's any potential for violence unless we've got information that person may be violent or there's red flags behind it. That's always the problem with a lot of these shootings that occur at employee termination. Just recently down in Florida, Palm Beach County, I believe it was, a longtime employee who happened to be 80 years old, told them, he was told that he had to leave. It's time to go. And I don't know all the facts of the case, but at the end of the day, he came back and killed one of the employers. Yeah. So, he shot him. And again, those kind of situations, and that's something that when I talk to business people and companies, hey, look, if you have those kind of issues, you should call us and we can work with you and we can work with the law enforcement authorities in that area, because a lot of times law enforcement is reacting to an active shooter, and sometimes you have to look at wanting to prevent that from happening. Now, you can't always predict people's behavior, but you can sure give it a try. And you can certainly, deal with professionals that can alert, the proper authorities, should that take place, and be able to handle the situation.
All right. Best place we can find info on you, Larry, so people can go and hire you today. Where can they go?
Sure. Well, they can go to my website as usual. It's www.fcisllc.com. And also we have our podcast, which is called Forletta Investigates. So it's the podcast is on every Tuesday at 9 a.m. And we talk to a variety of law enforcement professionals. And it's a very interesting podcast.
All right, Larry, again, great talking with you. We appreciate you coming on the Neil Haley Show and look forward to next week.
Thanks, Neil.
All right, guys. Again, that was the Neil Haley Show live here on Facebook and YouTube. Take care.